T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey friends, welcome to the Launch Sequence Podcast. This week, of course, we're talking about Star Citizen, but this week we're talking about one of the more boring topics, but also one of the more important topics. So, not to call your work boring, but the difference between 25 FPS and 30 FPS might not make the biggest difference to some people. But My guest today, TenPoundFortyTwo. Oh, those numbers, those are important. Look at his name. TenPoundFortyTwo. Thanks for joining me today, man. We're going to talk about some Star Citizen performance, and you are my go-to for this kind of stuff, but also a part of Team Tomato here. You do help with some of the editing with videos that we make for the main channel, and really appreciate that. Thank you for joining me on the show today as well. How are you doing?
Yes, good, thank you. Yeah, very, very good to be here. It's fun. I do accept that for a lot of people, they didn't get into Star Citizen to look at performance, but the reality is you have to. You haven't got any choice. The game is in such a bad performing place that everybody should be interested in performance.
Yeah, it's maybe that does make it exciting. Boring was the wrong word. I
would say boring. I find it boring sometimes.
Pew. It's definitely I've never cared about performance with a game that I've played. I mean, there are a lot of people who will try and get the best FPS out of every game they play. Generally, this happens more on the PC side, but even with console gaming in the last 5 to 10 years, people have gotten kind of rabid about frames per second and what console can run which game the fastest and why is this at 30. I grew up on consoles, so I'm very used to 30 frames per second, but I guess high stability. And now that I'm more into an MMO, more into this game that is considered pretty high-end, has a lot of money in the development, I see people with much higher expectations than I have. So I do like to get a little bit of a reality check from people like yourself who can speak a little bit more towards what we should actually be expecting. So today, we're going to help people learn what they can do to run the game the best they can, why it runs the way it is, and when maybe they can expect things to get a little bit better. Because I hear you can predict the future, right? It's like part of your thing.
I can make negative predictions pretty well. I can tell you when things aren't going to get better. But
all right, that might help. How has this game been treating you so far? 3.23 has been out for like a month. We've been waiting for 3.23.2 has been entering Evocati tomorrow for about 2 weeks now. And and the patch we've been waiting for, 3.23.1a, just went live. So things are still kind of happening, but they've also slowed down a bit. What's your take?
Yes, I have been doing so much testing. I think I've probably done more testing on this particular patch on 3.23 branch than I've ever done, because there's so many things that came in with 3.23. So obviously all the DLSS, FSR, TSR upscaling stuff, and then Vulkan finally, after 2.5, 3 years of it being talked about, finally came in a form, but it actually hasn't come in its final form. It's kind of a bit disappointed that it came in, but actually the multi-threaded aspect of it wasn't with that patch, and we're kind of waiting for that, so that will come at some stage. But
classic Star Citizen deployment.
Yeah, it's amazing. Oh, it's actually not quite, but there are some good things about Vulkan which we can talk about. But it's been I've been a really busy patch. But I think for me, the fact that the cargo stuff didn't come with the main drop of 3.23 has reduced my desire to play the game very much. Because although all the visual things and all the UI, there's so much in it that is amazing, and it feels quite significantly different. Mm-hmm. But the actual core game, I think the cargo changes will be really interesting to try out. But yes, I wouldn't say I'm burnt out from testing, but I've done so much, like hours and hours and hours, and they changed the official minimum spec on the minimum spec page. So
really?
I mean, it's not great, but I've got to my right here, I've got about four new old GPUs to test out. So yeah, lots more testing to go. So it's been an interesting and fun time, and it's it's not over yet.
My man's in business. You definitely have a more intensive version of playing this game than other people, which is saying something, because just getting around glitches in this game is its own game. The
Yes.
the point about the cargo updates not making it to the main patch is so true for a lot of people. I remember covering this patch before it came out, and people were, it's a little hyperbolic, but people were like, this patch is dead. There's nothing in this patch, and there's no reason to play. And like, I'm like, guys, there are things, but I totally understand how important and how big a deal the cargo refactor is. Like, we've been talking about cargo refactor since I think the end of 2022, like maybe mid to late 2022. They've been actively talking about it and like preparing us for it. But then we started to realize it was being broken out into multiple updates, which have taken more than a year to roll out. So at this point, this is like the main actual cargo refactor people have been waiting for, right? The physicalization of all your stuff and the way you get it and how you load the cargo. So for a lot of people, this is Star Citizen. This update is like, it represents the beginning of that game for them. And it really goes to show just how much you can have a great update. I think 3.23 is a great update, what it did for the game.
Yep.
But it's not balanced in the way that it didn't bring content. It was a good improvement update, but you need improvement and content, which I think is kind of what 4.0 is aiming for. But 3.23, it did a lot for the game, but it did not have the legs that it should have as big a patch it is.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I put up a poll on YouTube not that long ago, just asking are people still playing, and just a large chunk of people had just got to the point where they're like, "Oh, I'm not really playing at this point." Just like you say, the game changed, but the gameplay didn't change as drastically as people were hoping for, I think. And it's funny, you can argue that the cargo changes might be more significant than what's coming with 4.0. It's a fundamental change to the game, and it would obviously have been better had 3.23 all dropped at the same time and we had this huge change. But we're going to obviously now get this weird middle ground patch one day. To be honest, they may never release it at the rate they're going with the EVCard stuff. It may never come out. So we might be sitting here in a year saying, "Oh, it's coming tomorrow still." But yeah, I mean,
it
will
be
the new
4.0.
Yeah, definitely.
We never even got 4.0. Now we got a new one. I hope it comes out fairly soon. There's a lot of people who are saying, or worried rather, that this work from 3.23.2 not coming into the game is having a potential delay on 4.0. Do you think that's true?
Oh, it's hard to predict. I mean, I think that my guess would be yes, it will affect it, because the teams that are working on this are probably also got quite a lot to do for 4.0 as well. There's a networking element to all of this and working out how it all works, how you can now go into your friends' hangars and all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of stuff that they've had to probably... We don't exactly know why it's not come out yet. They've not given us the... they've not given us the reasons.
That's probably a big part of it.
But you'd think, that some of the parts that are probably related to new ways of doing networking and everything. So... Yeah, that when we had Jared say that we'll get 4.0 in the summer, when he confidently said that on that video, whenever it was, I was already... I mean, if you follow Star Citizen for too long, you have to just realise that things don't quite ever come out when they say they will. But I thought that was very optimistic, and it depends how you class summer, maybe. If you're in the southern hemisphere, the summer is in my winter. So if you're in Australia, maybe it will be fine. But I would see from a UK point of view, I would really hope that we do get it by September. But who knows?
It also, what does come out mean? Like, is that ePTU?
Yeah.
Are we talking open PTU or live? So if we're hitting ePTU in late September, then maybe it reaches the live servers by like November, December. You never really know. Not to say that's what's going to happen. I'm still thinking we'll see it in the PTU this summer.
I hope so.
But really, it depends on the next update on server meshing. That's what we're waiting for, right? Everything else hinges on that. So we will.
Yeah.
We'll see. What else has your attention this summer? Before we get into the performance discussion of Star Citizen, we just had like a bunch of game announcements and stuff. Any other games of interest to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll always play the Star Wars stuff. The Outlaws. Well, I didn't actually catch when the release date for that is. When is that?
August, I believe.
Yeah, so I'll play that.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I've been playing a lot of Star Marine recently. So if I've had like a bit of time, Star Marine. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for it. I quite enjoy FPS side of things, and in some ways it's in a terrible state in that there's lots of issues with people's movement, like you're kind of, as you strafe, your characters fly all over the place, and as you load in, your guns like spinning around, like it's carnage. But compared to how it was, I don't know. I played a lot in 2.6. I played a lot of Star Marine in 2.6, and it has just naturally got better as performance has got better. So it can be kind of fun, and now they've got all the different game modes rotating around. Yeah, if people haven't played it, it's kind of worth giving a go if you like FPS stuff. But yeah, that's not necessarily going to hold me for too long. I mean, to be honest, the amount of time that it takes to do testing, I do get limited amounts of time to play other games. But I'm sure, yeah, I'll make some space for any Star Wars stuff. Although, I mean, that's probably another topic. Star Wars stuff seems to be a bit controversial right now.
Oh. Yeah, who cares? I'm very excited for the Star Wars game. I don't know if it's going to be good or not. I'm not, it's Ubisoft as a publisher, but it is Massive as a studio. Massive does pretty good work. They maybe under Ubisoft's tutelage, they make some bad mistakes, but I think they make good gameplay systems that feel good to use. I've heard that the gameplay for this game feels a little outdated, but one of the things that originally drew me to Star Citizen was a disappointment in the lack of console space games I was looking for. So I was like very excited for Prey 2. Not the new Prey that Arcane made, but Prey 2, which had that cool concept trailer and then never showed up. Super excited for Star Wars 1313, never showed up. Mass Effect 3 finished, nothing else was coming. So I was like looking for space games around 2013, 2014, and that's where Star Citizen came in. But like, this is the closest thing we're probably going to get to Star Wars 1313. So I'm excited just to have a non-force focused open world Star Wars game. I hope it's entertaining. In the same way I hope that Starfield was entertaining.
How did that one go for you? Oh man, it was Starfield. Oh, it's not even talking about Starfield.
I'm sad that I didn't finish it. I've had a lot going on in the last 6 months. Last 8 months, so like I haven't had the time to indulge in a lot of video games, but I'm very sad that a new space game, a AAA space game came out and I haven't finished it at this point, because like when Mass Effect 2 came out, I played that game for like 12 freaking hours straight when it first came out. I was obsessed. So
yes,
I think the jury ultimately is out on that one for me, but I do think that it was good that we have a high profile space game in the industry.
I think it helps Star Citizen. I think by comparison, people looked at Star Citizen and was like, oh, this can do some stuff that Starfield can't do. But the thing about it was, it wasn't a bad game. I played quite a lot, but then I got to a point, I finished one of the bigger organization group big mission things, and then I just never picked it up again. I just didn't have any real desire to just keep going. I kind of felt like I've probably seen most of what I want to see in the gameplay side of things. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It definitely helped Star Citizen by association, just because people looked at Starfield, they looked at Star Citizen and were like, oh. And obviously, CitizenCon was very well placed in terms of capitalizing on all the stuff. It really helped.
And people don't even know about Squadron. Star Citizen can be such a quick turnoff for a lot of people, for the name, for the reputation it has, for the fact that it's an MMO. People underestimate how much that's going to make people not play it. I wouldn't have played it, to be honest, and I think if you are on the line, like if you're into sci-fi gaming but you don't like other people, which is cool, the idea of an MMO where you can just randomly run into people and they can shoot you is kind of going to turn people off of it. And Squadron 42 is much more relatable, I think, and comparable to these games, and it looks beautiful, and it plays like it looks like it plays like a Call of Duty campaign. So I think that'll be a lot more of a thing for folks. But also, you mentioned Star Marine. Do you think that they will ever release that separately?
So like the Arena Commander stuff, as a standalone. I don't think it's a priority at this point, but yes, it wouldn't be shocking if after the Squadron has come out, they just say here's a free version that you can play, or even again, I think most people are still assuming that at some point Squadron will come to console, and so again, will that be bundled in, or will there be a section of that where you can go and try out Star Citizen in a really limited way?
That'd be such a good package. That'd be such a classic package too. A narrative campaign and some good arena multiplayer. That'd be great if they could release that on console as a little Trojan horse for Star Citizen. Be like, okay, now go buy a PC.
Well, it's almost the opposite of what Sony have been doing, haven't they? There's been a big hoo-ha about Sony's practices around getting people to sign up to their account so that they then go and play games on the PS5 or whatever. But yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if CIG, once the initial launch of Squadron has happened, they then decide when they put it on console to. It makes sense. It does make sense.
Yeah, I think so. All right, let's talk about performance. Let's talk about how is Star Citizen running. Big question first. How is the performance doing right now compared to 1 year ago?
Well, once you sent that question over, I had a look, and so I tested the 7800 X3D about a year ago, about 11 months ago, and so for the main example would be to go around Lorville. The average of going around Lorville a year ago on a 7800 X3D at 1080p, so you're completely CPU bound, was about 60 FPS. And now it's about 63, 64, maybe 65 FPS. So we maybe have gained 5 frames. But that's obviously one example and one in the cities where you're CPU bound. But there's obviously been a lot of changes coming to the GPU in terms of upscaling. The upscaling stuff has been massive. So there are signs that CIG are starting to worry about client-side performance. There's in the patch that's come out last night, the 323.1a patch. These patches are getting silly, the names, but there's a bit in there about client-side optimization, and I think possibly that's to do with Xenothreat coming, and Xenothreat has traditionally always run really badly in terms of your client-side frame rate, even on high-end hardware.
Yeah.
With all the ships going on, it's been a mess. So it'll be really interesting to see how Xenothreat runs on decent hardware now. Will it be better? And they have actually, alongside the Vulkan stuff they've been doing, the render thread they were working on for a long time. And in the testing I've done for that in 323, that's also taken quite a step forward in terms of performance compared to the last patch. So there are signs that they are starting to care about performance more than they ever have before, because yes, there's been points where it's improved over the last 10 years or whatever, but there's never been a sense where CIG have been like, right, we're now trying to get this into a really good place. And I think with Squadron coming, obviously it's not the same game, but it's the same code base, and they'll start optimizing, I think, for Squadron, and maybe we'll see some of that in Star Citizen itself. So the signs are that it's hopefully going to start getting better, but it still doesn't perform like a real game. That's probably the quickest way to put it.
So the things that you're seeing, like the patch note that you saw, and some of the stuff that's pointing you towards the fact that they care more about client side, you didn't see that before in monthly reports or patch notes or anything like that?
Well, I mean, the engine stuff in the monthly report is normally it normally could be like an alien language to most people, including me. You have to. I think you have to. It's written for developers. And interestingly, they've not had it in the last couple of.
They stopped doing the engine segment.
Yeah, maybe because they somehow could tell that nobody could actually understand what they were saying. But
I think they've started to split it into the graphics and VFX and R&D sections to kind of like spread that stuff out. But generally, it's like I'm just wondering short term, because they've been talking about trying to kind of optimize and improve things, Gen 12 renderer and all that kind of stuff over the last couple of years. But you feel like even more short term than that, they're starting to focus more on client side stuff?
I think we'll have to see as we go into 4.0, but the signs that they've actually, this patch particular, that they've actually spent some time looking at client side performance suggests to me that either they just weren't happy with how Xeno Threat was going to run, because it's been in the PTE for ages now. Xeno Threat has been running and running and running. There's been server side issues as well as performance issues. So it could just be that, but they must be aware of the eyes that are going to be on the game as 4.0 comes out. And if it was me, well, it's not me, but if it was me, I would be thinking, can we do anything to make performance a bit better than it is? Because although I'm saying, I'm getting 65 FPS going around Lawville, that's on the highest end system really that you can buy. If you, I'll show you.
That's not great.
That's on, This is CIG's actual minimum spec CPU that they recommend. So they've recently changed this. This is an i7 Sandy Bridge 2600. You get around 12 FPS going around Lawville on that. And that's what they recommend. Craziness. That's that. So on the website, they updated to recommend that CPU. And so, yes.
What GPU? And that's CPU throttle. Doesn't matter what GPU you have.
Completely bottlenecked by this. You could throw a 4090 on that and you'd get nothing more than that.
So just don't even play the game. Don't even get the game if you're minimum spec of what they say.
Well, yeah, come and watch one of my videos and I'll tell you what you really should buy. Basically, it's the short version of it. But I can't understand why they're doing it. And again, like I said earlier to you, they have updated the GPUs on that recommendation list as well. And I've got them literally off camera there, but I'll be testing those. But I know from some of them that I've tested in the past that they are also bad recommendations. So yeah, if CIG has not got the game into a place where your average PC gamer can just download the game and play and it will be fine. And so I would imagine going into 4.0 and then obviously the further down the line, the 1.0 thing that they're aiming for, they will want to get the game in a better place for your average player, because it's anything like this, it's a numbers game that the game won't succeed in the long term future if they can't get the game running for more people. They want as many people as possible to play the game.
Yeah, and that is a conundrum they're having both on this side of things, but also gameplay. They have built a vision of a game that is very unique. It's pretty niche, even with things like we've been talking about with the cargo changes. These aren't mass market sort of features that people want to deal with. And it's such a little nerve-wracking to imagine how they're going to maneuver this idea of making sure this is a game that appeals to enough people to fund it while also still being a game that is unique enough that in the way that it has kept people around for 12 years while being broken. Like there's a reason people have been here despite this being so difficult, and they can't lose that.
The hardcore nature of some of the features obviously is partly what's brought people in, that they've wanted a game that obviously realism, immersion has been a word that CIG have used over the years. Absolutely knows. But yes, it does seem that the poop is hitting the fan slightly in terms of they're suddenly thinking, are some of these more hardcore features actually what we want to do or not? This is the problem, I suppose, of having a game in open development for so long, is that they've said so many things over the years. So many, we could do this, and there's been so many Chris Roberts, 10 for the chairman. That sounds like a good idea. Now you mention it, we could do that, But they said there's now how many years? 10 years of them saying the stuff like that then they have to now bring it all into an actual game, and that's complicated and will upset some people, because some people will say, I think for one of your videos, I was looking at the Kickstarter page, and the whole idea of co-op Squadron 42 is on the Kickstarter, and it's like, that sounds great. And that, for a lot of people at the start, they would have been like, yes, I'd love to do that. And then they canned that quite a while ago, and there'll be lots of examples like that where the game's scope just changes, and some people will get upset. But for me personally, I try to have quite a light approach to the whole game, and I'm kind of like, I'm just having to let it happen, and whatever way it happens, and I will enjoy aspects of it. I'm sure there'll be parts of it I don't enjoy, but it will be what it will be ultimately, I think.
Yeah, things are going to change. So Star Citizen performance isn't great, would you say, on average?
Compared to a proper game or a released game, for most people, they try the game out my advice for most people is try the game out at a free fly event. And most people try the game out and they're like, what's going on? This game, my PC will run every other game fine. What is happening here? And it is just like nothing else. There's no other game, I don't think, that's quite as demanding as Star Citizen. It is the Crysis 3 of our generation in some ways, in that if you want to test, especially your CPU, Star Citizen will be more demanding than any other game out there. So yeah, for most people, the average person, it's challenging, and you have to lower your expectations. You have to think, well, for me, my expectation when I'm talking about minimum spec is I can hit 30 FPS most of the time, and there'll definitely be dips below that. But it's, for a lot of people, you'll be sub 20 if you turn this on a PC from maybe 6 years ago. You'll be like, what on earth is happening?
Yeah, that's not good.
No.
So from what you've been seeing then, how, like, this it's got to change. How will performance improve? They've got a lot of work to do on it. Have they even, like, I know about the Vulkan API and multi-threading. I don't know much about how that can improve things, but can you tell us what you know about what's to come?
Yeah, well, let's in part of this is so you've obviously got the GPU and the CPU side of things to simplify it.
Yeah.
On the GPU side of things, we have upscaling now in game. So with 323, we've got NVIDIA's DLSS, we've got AMD's FSR, and we've got CIG's own TSR, which is relatively similar to FSR from AMD. So we now have the ability to basically say your monitor is a 1440p monitor. You can turn the game on. You can go in your settings. You can turn the upscaling to upscale from 1080p up to 1440p. So you get the performance as if your GPU is running at 1080p, and that for GPUs is very effective. There's a reason why this is kind of blown up over the last few years. NVIDIA pushed it with DLSS first. It's very effective, and in the testing I've done, DLSS especially looks very good. So if you've got an NVIDIA card, my recommendation at this point is basically I would seriously think about turning on DLSS and just forgetting about it, because it is very effective. The problem is that with Star Citizen, we're not GPU bound most of the time, or at least most people aren't. So the CPU side of things, a lot of people for a long time have been thinking Vulkan will save everything. It's the Jesus tech or whatever, the silver bullet. And so it's come in now. And what we've seen in the testing I've done is that at the moment, Vulkan it doesn't perform, the average won't be as high as in DX11, but the frame pacing, the consistency between the frames is much better with Vulkan. So there's big issues with it as well. There's things like HDR doesn't work on it. Some people just can't get it working. It is a beta for a reason. So for a lot of people, Vulkan isn't the right choice to switch to now at this stage. But the hope is that when they get multi-threaded rendering in, which Ali Brown has said on Spectrum that will be the next release. So that could mean .2, but it could more realistically mean 4.0.
Yeah.
There's hope that will see an improvement in performance versus DX11. So that's kind of where we're at this point. How are they going to improve things? I think a lot of hope is that on the CPU side, that Vulkan will help things. But I don't want to get too technical, but there's two major issues on the CPU side. There's the rendering the render thread of the engine, and then there's the game thread, the logic thread doing all the physics and everything. And often the render thread isn't the problem; it's actually the main thread of the game engine. So we've seen in the past at various points, 3.17 I think, where they just suddenly out of nowhere tweaked a load of things with the entities, and it made performance better. But ultimately, it's relying on those crazy people that we occasionally see on videos from CIG who do all the engine stuff to just keep improving things. So I don't think we can say Vulkan is going to fix everything, but it should help, definitely. But this is a long journey, and obviously that's a crazy thing to say 12 years in. But as they move forward, as they go to 1.0, as they go to Squadron 42, I'm hoping that there'll be optimizations. But as I always say, the biggest thing for performance is going to be time. Like, compared to 12 years ago when this CPU came out, or 2011, the i7 2600, the CPUs that are now coming out are much faster. And so the biggest hope for if you're sitting there thinking, wait.
I'm sorry.
Go on.
2600.
Go on.
I thought it was, no, that wouldn't have even made sense. I thought it was literally i7 2600 is that processor?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's so much older than I thought.
Yeah, 2011, that thing. Yeah, there's a Ryzen 2600, but that's AMD. This is 11 years old, and it's even older than that. 2011, whenever it came out. That has been so far superseded by new hardware that our biggest hope is that AMD and Intel just keep releasing better and faster CPUs. That's the most realistic hope over the next few years. As CIG gradually improve the engine, that we get faster and faster hardware, which is a terrible answer. That's quite upsetting. I don't want to tell people go out and buy better hardware, but that is genuinely the best thing you can do to get better performance right now. And that probably will continue, I think, as it goes. There's an argument to say that the game that CIG pitched and Chris Roberts pitched in 2012 was impossible on the hardware that was available at that point. And as time has gone on, it's become more realistic that game will actually run. But like I say, we've basically got the same system, me and you, and that will only get you 60 FPS in the cities, and that's not great compared to a lot of games. So who knows how it's going to pan out?
It's funny that you say that about back when the pitch was made, because I remember he specifically was like, a few years ago, I couldn't have done this. Like, there wasn't the technology to do this. And it's like, yeah, in a few years, there still won't be the technology to do it. I mean, I know the pitch changed like a lot. The Planet stuff really changed everything in 2015, but it really goes to show, I think, just how much more work they have to do, because yeah, Vulkan might help, and like you said, little steps and pieces of optimization might come in, but we're talking getting from 30 frames per second on some of these average PCs up to a locked in 60 to 90 frames per second for those same PCs, right? Like, an average PC should be able to run this at 60, whereas computers like ours should be well over 100 frames per second. Vulkan's not going to do that, right?
No. And I don't really know why they're still recommending a 2011 CPU as the minimum. I don't know if they've got something in the back of their minds, or they've got some plan to make that work at 30 or 60, or even the CPUs now that I would recommend as minimum that run around 30 FPS. So that's the Ryzen 3600 or the Intel i5 10400, around that mark. I don't see a way in that they can double the performance on those parts. I think what's much more likely to happen at some stage is that they'll just up the requirements, because this game isn't coming out in 2024, whatever out means. When we get an actual 1.0 release, it's reasonable to increase the minimum requirements. So I've got no idea why they're recommending such slow old hardware, but I can't see a world in which they suddenly can support the i7 2600 from 2011. Yeah, you're right. They're going to have to either do something absolutely miraculous to double people's performance, or they're just going to have to say, oh, sorry, we were recommending that CPU. You actually can't use that anymore.
You've benchmarked other games before, right?
I did a little bit with the Star Wars Jedi Survivor 2,
Oh boy.
whatever that was. That was not. I did that purely because it was a mess. That was all over the place.
Yeah.
That made Star Citizen look good because the frame time was all over the shop. It was.
Wow.
That's
bad.
It was a mess. Yeah, to make Star Citizen look good, you've really done something really.
You got to try.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask about, and I'm sure people in chat know the answer to this better than I ever will, but what is the kind of expectation for how old of CPU or how old computer hardware you can have and still run a game at a stable 30 frames? Let's say, like, that's acceptable, right? A PC game running at a stable 30 frames for people with certain hardware, or is the minimum level of performance for people now 60 frames? I'm not on these forums or like Reddit subreddits. I don't know what people want now.
It really depends on what sort of game it is. So for, say, a competitive esports shooter game, you want way more than 60. 60 wouldn't be acceptable. You'd want at least maybe 144. I mean, if you've seen, there's now monitors that will go up to 360 hertz in terms of refresh rate and things like that. So for that sort of game, the more frames, the merrier. And Star Citizen, I don't think will ever. I mean, you can in space where nothing else is going on, you can see 200 FPS upwards, but that doesn't represent any sort of gameplay out in space. But I don't think Star Citizen will ever be. We will be playing this game at 300 plus FPS, aren't we? Let me retract that. If Star Citizen takes as long as it might do to come out, maybe we will. Maybe there will be some sort of crazy breakthrough, quantum computing, whatever it would be, where suddenly the game in 20 years' time suddenly works really well. But
that was the key. It's the key to the optimization.
Quantum, it's always quantum. Whatever. If we can get another use of quantum in Star Citizen, that would be great. But I think it depends on the game. So if you're playing like a story-based single-player game, you'd accept 30 FPS maybe, especially on consoles. But I think 60 is like the minimum that people would accept for a PC game. But yeah, if it's the thing with Star Citizen is that it is every sort of game in some ways. Like there's points where you're doing certain parts of the game where you're like, it makes no difference what my frame rate is here. But if you suddenly run into some pirates who jack your ship and you're trying to defend yourself, well, it does then matter what your frame rate is if you're trying to shoot them with in FPS. Like that does matter. So I think 60. CIG have sort of talked about targeting 60 in the past, and so I think that's what we'll end up with for most people. But yeah, it just depends on people's expectations. If you're coming from console, you'll be looking at it thinking, "Oh, 30 FPS is okay."
Yeah, that's me.
If you're coming at it from like Valorant or some sort of crazy FPS game, you're looking at it thinking, "This is unplayable." Like some people will look at 60 FPS as unplayable, and they would look at 30 FPS as an absolute joke. So, yeah, it is about expectations and where you've come from, really.
And what would you say if they were targeting 60 FPS? How old of hardware would you say needs to support that kind of a frame rate?
Yeah, well, if we're saying that the 7800 X3D, the CPU that we both have, will do 60 in Lawville, you can't go any lower than that. You can't go any older than that. So that's a brand new CPU from AMD.
It's like, what, 2 years old? When did that come out?
1 year, about a year ago.
Okay.
Maybe a year and a half. And so similar on the Intel side, if you've got the highest end Intel CPU right now, you would be around that mark as well, maybe with a bit of overclocking as well. So yeah, if you want, that is the amazing thing about this CPU, about the 7800 X3D and the other X3D CPUs from AMD. They're the first time that I've been running around the cities around 60 FPS. And that was unthinkable a few years ago. There was no way that would ever happen. So the hardware really has bumped us quite significantly along. But yeah, if you're quite fussy about the game running at a good frame rate, you have to buy the best PC out there from a CPU side of things, not so much on the GPU side of things.
Yeah, it's going to be. We're going to have our eyes glued to how that works over the next couple of years. I think that's important that they make that run better. You know, we've been talking about this has to appeal to a bunch of people. Most people can't afford that CPU. And even if they can, most people don't want to put that towards the CPU. They'd rather put it towards the GPU or something else. So
yeah, if you're playing another game, the GPU is Stats is really quite unique in that the CPU is much more important, and the RAM to a certain extent. But the GPU is more important for building a well-balanced gaming PC generally.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a weird scenario. I mean, maybe the counterpoint is that in the cities, there's not really any gameplay. Like you're not doing anything that requires you to have 60 FPS. And once you get out of the cities, into space, onto the moons, things like that, you're generally seeing quite good performance on lower end hardware. So it's my big thing is that you open the game up, you load in, and you're in a city. And for a lot of people, if that first experience is tragic, like sub 15 FPS, which some people might find, they're going to just be like, well, this is a terrible game. I'm refunding. I'm turning off. And so there's a case to say CIG should actually allow people to set spawn in a station somewhere where your performance won't be as bad. But they obviously have spent so many development hours and time and money making these incredibly kind of immersive, again, cities. And so they obviously want to show them off. But from my understanding, most people, they kind of log into a city and they move all their stuff to a space station because they don't want to be in the city. So
yeah,
it's a weird thing.
But that's also because the cities just don't do anything. Like, we don't even have, I say we don't even, but the building interiors feels like they're sort of, this is when cities will matter in the coming 10 patches after that, so when cities will matter. But it really does feel like there's just no reason for cities, and it's been quite a while that we've had them. The only real reasons we had to go to them before were mission givers, but mission givers broke. So it is kind of, there's not much reason to be there, and then the performance isn't great. It's not good for the new player experience. I wonder if that's something that they're really keen on changing.
I was surprised when they dropped the building interior stuff for the UGFs, because I think the building interior stuff would have been more impactful for the game and the gameplay. I think if we, like you say, in the same way that on the stations in Pyro, you could go off on the station to an abandoned area, there'd be some content on the station to do. That felt quite kind of organic and felt quite good. And I think when we can get to the point where you can wake up at Lawville, you get a mission pop up to just travel over to this gate or whatever, and then you go into a building, do a bit of FPS stuff, and then you can base yourself in a city and do gameplay in the city. Yeah. I think the game will be in a much better place at that stage. So I'm surprised that maybe they moved towards the UGF stuff because of performance. Maybe that was one of the reasons they did it, because you could take a UGF, plop it in the middle of nowhere on a moon or a planet, and get better performance maybe compared to doing it in a city. But yeah, building interiors and missions in cities, I would say that should be part of the 1.0 vision that they go for, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's funny that some of the things like building interiors are things that I'm starting to hear talked about from Rockstar, things that they're working on for their new game, which has been in development for about the same amount of time as Star Citizen, and I think currently has the highest budget, reportedly the highest budget for game development. So they're like kind of hitting some parallels. Building interiors is one of the things that is rumored to be a big thing in GTA 6, and we could end up seeing in Star Citizen and Squadron. But did you know they filed a patent for something that sounds very, very similar to server meshing?
Rockstar.
Yeah. It's basically the idea of being able to use, I think they called it like seamless server transition in GTA Online, and which is basically they just want to have the city be multiple servers that you can move in between. And it's interesting to see that the biggest entities in gaming are kind of thinking the same thing in terms of where these sorts of big games are headed. So I'm excited to see what CIG does with building interiors, because I do think that hearing that somebody like Rockstar is also putting effort into this, it kind of bolsters that confidence that, okay, this is a direction they can head in that people will understand and vibe with and know getting into this game. But yeah, it's a bummer that didn't come instead of UGFs, and then the UGFs came without the U. They just kind of were. There was not much underground facility part to those underground facilities.
Yeah. It always feels to me as though CIGs don't have ever quite enough people available to work on the thing that they're doing, and so things always come in a little bit undercooked, and that's not always true, but it feels like with the amount of money that we as a community have thrown at them, you would hope that there'd be some more developers available to do some more stuff. Maybe that's me not understanding games very well, but it does. When they said about at CIG about the whole ship team leaving, and they only had what do they have left? Was it like 12 ship artists left or something at one point in 2022 or something? I don't know exactly what it was. They lost a load of people to go and work on Star Atlas, didn't they? And that's why the Boundary Merchantment didn't happen.
Yeah.
When they released the numbers of ship artists, I was like, there's 800 people at this studio. I would have thought there'd be more people working on the art side of things for the ships, but
that was in one of the recent videos, right? I think I highballed it because I said there's probably no more than 70 people working dedicated to ships. That's probably a large number. There are not that many people working only on ships in the company. And I think you're right. And this is one of the questions people have had a lot of times. It's like, where the heck is the development? And most of the time it's like, well, most of it's going towards Squadron 42. But then you're like, okay, well, Squadron 42 is a military narrative campaign. How much varied development is there outside of that or in that? So that is one of the major questions of Star Citizen that we're probably going to come to a bit of a inflection point on over the next year as this whole our Squadron people are moving over to Star Citizen and development will pick up. Like, that needs to prove true, because you got 1,200 people working on these projects and you're saying that these people are starting to move over to Star Citizen. We better start seeing some things come in much more complete,
for sure. And I'm sure that will happen, and the hope is that Squadron is obviously very good, and so you're thinking, well, it was worth the time and the money that they took on it. But it's a bit of a double-edged sword. If it has to be really good, otherwise the whole project, I think, is in trouble. But if it is really good, well, that just means that they'll want to make Squadron 45 or 40, 43. Get with them as but I mean, they've already talked about multiple chapters. But if it's an absolute smash hit, I mean, they will obviously immediately, and I'm sure they will anyway, but they'll start looking at the next version and the next.
Hey, you know what?
Yeah,
I'm okay. If it's a smash hit and they get distracted with Squadron 42 Chapter 2, I will be annoyed that Star Citizen is moving slowly, but that would be much better than if the game was bad and the whole project died.
Yes, I think that's probably the right way to look at it. You might be annoyed that it might slow down our 1.0 thing even more, but the worst case scenario is that Squadron is terrible and people will say, what did you do with all the money? And then it starts a downward spiral, and
yes,
we're in big trouble.
That would be bad. The best thing this game can do, the best thing CIG can do, is release a good game. Like, that's what's hurting them, because there are other companies that take tons of money to make games. Maybe not 700. I don't know. It's like somebody the other day said something like, oh yeah, GTA 6 has taken 12 years to make, but they're not charging us money to make it. I'm like, dude, they're using the money you spent on the other stuff. So it's hard to say how much money a game has taken to make, but there are plenty of companies that take a lot of money, plenty of companies that take a lot of years. Most of those companies have released something though, and it would really help CIG to just have a good product on the market. I don't think it would be a problem if Star Citizen took a little bit more time to be made because they were working on Chapter 2, because that also means maybe they can stop milking Star Citizen so much for funding.
I don't know if that's ever going to happen. I think there'll be a combined milking. There'll be a milking of us and the Squadron 42 people.
Farm. The Space Cow Farm.
It'll be that Nintendo Switch game, 1-2 Switch with the milking minigame. That's what it is. But it's we don't want the project to collapse, but we do want the game to come out one day. I mean, the funny thing is that there's obviously never been a game studio that's got no track record that's been given this money. As in every other, so Rockstar obviously have got a very good track record and therefore have built themselves up to be one of the biggest and best development studios in the world. Whereas CIG, they've told us they're good, or they've told us that they've got a good idea, but they've never released a full working game, so we don't know what they're capable of. So I mean, I think it's often downplayed the amount of effort and time and work it's probably taken and money to build up a game studio. But they've built. I mean, if you ever go back and look at the really early videos where they're all working in a house in Austin, with the whole wingman hangar stuff and everything like that, you can see that this project they've grown a giant studio from nothing, and it's on its own that's very impressive. But yeah, it would help if they actually released a game one day.
Yeah, man, that can't be easy. I mean, other people have had more experience in doing this stuff, but I'm just imagining trying to take, like even what we're doing here, Space Tomato Gaming, and expanding it to like 20 people. And I'm like, oh my God, no, please no. To do that with 1,000 people across the world with a game that like, you have to make sure the game runs and also build it. I sometimes, I guess a lot of people think, was this too much to take on?
Yeah, and because it's not just we've built everything up and we're making a game. We've built this up from nothing, and we're making the most ambitious game the world has ever seen that can do literally everything. You can do all these things. We're going to push the tech further than everything else. We're going to try and make it look better than everything else. As in, it is madness on one level if you think about it. As in, had they originally gone to a publisher and said, "Oh, we'd like to do this. Will you back us?" The publishers would have all said no, which is why it's crowdfunded. So. Yeah, it is crazy, but yet we're still here, and it's actually starting to take shape in some way. So, yes, you've got to cross your fingers, pray, whatever sort of thing you want. That Squadron 42 is good, and that we can move on to 1.0 one day.
Star Citizen stuff, yes. Let's talk about general game performance. We've been talking a lot about client side, but there's also server meshing coming up in 4.0. And they're doing a lot of like refactors, the mid-transit system, mission system, probably other things that they haven't worked on until server meshing was working. What are you thinking? And, this doesn't have to be like a professional opinion, it could be speculation, but what are you thinking players might see in terms of performance improvements or degradation when 4.0 lands with server meshing? And possibly, I guess, also the multi-threading.
Yes, well... 4.0 is going to be very interesting. I mean, the one thing that I've not really seen many people talk about is that CIG have somehow quite successfully launched 3.23 with oh man, what is it? What's the technical thing in 3.23 that's we're waiting for? Replication, yes.
Yeah.
They've managed to release that fairly successfully. It hasn't been a 3.18 part 2, which a lot of people were worried that it would be. So, but still, the worry going into 4.0 is that server meshing will cause havoc. You obviously had a go on the server meshing tests when it was on the PTU. I had a go as well, and it worked relatively well up until a certain point, and then it fell to pieces. But there were many issues with the game. So missions don't work across servers. Quantum travel, you got stopped when you were when you swapped servers. So there were so many issues, and I'm surprised in some ways that we've not had another server meshing test. I would have thought we'll get one before 4.0. You'd think they'd want to be testing out how they're getting on, but that's a separate thing. But there's a decent chance that it is going to be hopefully not as bad as 3.18, but it's such a fundamental change to the game that I would think from a server-side performance point of view, we should all be at least nervous about how it's going to pan out, because it is a huge thing. And yeah, to rewrite their missions system completely, even just that on its own, it sounds, I'm not a game developer, but it sounds like a huge deal. So
yeah, I
would have my expectation going into 4.0 that it will be rough. It will be in the PTU, like you said earlier. When will it come out? Well, it could be in the PTU for months, like 3.18 was, because it's such a big change. And so let's hope it's not like 3.0 that we're waiting for a year for. Was it?
Oh my God! 3. Yeah, that was bad. That was the drought. That was the ultimate drought.
Yeah, that was really bad. But this is a as significant change to the game as that in some ways. Like, yeah, I mean, we're not going from maybe that's not quite true, but it's a big deal. It's a huge deal.
No, I think you're right.
It is.
Yeah. This is, I mean, 3.0, the big change was, 2.0, the big change was the PU, right, being introduced. 3.0, the big change was the planets being introduced. 4.0, the big change is star systems. Like, that's huge. This is, definitely. And it's not just star systems, it's server meshing. It's splitting up the things we got in those other ones, the planets, into multiple servers. So I think you're spot on with, this is bigger than that. We saw with 3.0, we saw a mission system refactor, we saw transit system refactor. Basically all the things that are happening now were happening then. So that kind of already sells the idea of how big this patch is. But also they've got better priorities now, right? They want the game to be more playable. They are better at deploying patches. And they know, like you said earlier, that there are a lot more eyes and expectations on this update. This is an update we've been waiting 8 years for. They have to, can they afford to have this be bad on live?
Well, again, it could be like a bit like Squadron, is that you just don't want it to come out and be a car crash. Yeah. The general gaming vibe, I think, from what I can pick up, is that people are starting to think that Squadron 40, that Star Citizen, maybe it's not a scam after all. There's obviously people like Summit playing the game, and there's been coverage and YouTubers over the last few years. The tide of opinion might be shifting, but if 4.0 is an absolute car crash, that won't help that. Yeah. But it should be a car crash. It is such a giant thing. And like we said, no other company has tried to do this. Maybe Rockstar's having a go, but it's a giant thing. And the only thing that I'm thinking that maybe could make it not as big a deal is they could split the servers in multiple different ways. We saw that on the server meshing test. The simplest version they can do, though, is still just one server for Pyro, one server for Stanton. And that technically gives us server meshing, but it's much more straightforward than having lots of different places with lots of different servers. So I think people will be a bit disappointed if it's just that, because that won't do anything for server performance, because you've still got the whole of Stanton being run on one server, and people will be like, well, the game hasn't changed. You just jump server when you go to Pyro. But they've not told us what they're going to do. We don't know. So it could be as simple as two servers connected. I was surprised at how ambitious they were when they did the server meshing test. That we had 6 servers running on some of the bigger ones, all connected together. That was pretty shocking to me. So maybe they're more confident, but we don't know. And we're now in the bit where they haven't said anything about anything really for a while. So
we're in one of those times. Yeah. Now I know they've been very distracted with 323. There's a lot of features to talk about there, so I understand that they didn't need to trot out server meshing. They did the public server meshing tests, they got us all hyped, they let us know it works, and then they're now back into the cave working. But we have Inside Star Citizens coming up towards the end of this week. People are probably watching this after it's already happened, and as we get back into that season, it's going to be 4.0 stuff. They have to talk about server meshing. Knowing them, they'll probably wait until late in the season to give us a full ISC on it. But they can't be telling us, server meshing is coming in 3 months, and not show us that it even works. So I do think that, this is their proving ground, 4.0. They needed to go live well. I think that they should try. Obviously, there's never performance parity between PTU and live. It always changes when it goes live. But I think they should have this as stable as humanly possible before this goes to public eyes, because this is it for them. Not to say this is like do or die and the project will fail if this is a bad update, but we've been trotting out the server meshing prophecy for a while, and I don't think it's going to change everything in one day. I don't think 4.0 is going to be the big change, but it does need to have signs of this headed in the direction that people are more interested in playing it on a wider scale.
Yeah, definitely. It is a moment in the game. So I can think back to various moments in because I backed pretty close to the start. I can think back at various wow moments. Probably the most embarrassing one was the first download of the Hangar module. Turning my computer on in the middle of the night to download the Hangar module because I was so excited run around a hangar. But the first moment where I landed on a moon, it it it's that sticks with me because it was like, this is crazy. This is crazy that I can do this. I
Yeah.
can travel from this place, and so that memory is kind of seared in my mind. And I think for a lot of people, the first point of going through a jump point, actually traveling between two systems, is a significant thing, and so we do want it to be a good experience. We want it to work well.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because the jump point experience is supposed to be something really deep, the way they talk about it. Like,
Yeah.
it's mysterious, it's a little dark, it's kind of scary at times, and then you pop out into a new system and it should be epic music and all that
Yeah.
stuff. Agreed, man. It's funny that you mentioned the moon landing as being like a big moment, because that was so novel back then. Like, it was crazy that we could do that. Now it's super normal, completely utterly normal to just fly down to a planet and land, even though there are still space games that are coming out where you can't do that.
Well, yeah, the Star Wars game again. What I saw is that it's cutscene. It's, you go through the atmosphere a bit and then it pulls you into a cutscene.
I like how they do that.
It looked good, yeah.
Yeah.
But that is what Star Citizen originally was meant to be, before they changed all the planetary stuff. But yeah, it's so easy to take for granted what Star Citizen can already do because we've been playing it for a while now. But if you compare it to other games, it genuinely is quite impressive.
Yeah. But that performance, man.
Yeah, let's forget about that. That's boring. Don't worry about that.
So, in all honesty, you think 4.0 is going to be degradation for performance for people?
Well, yeah, you've got obviously the client side things. If they do bring in the multi-threaded rendering for Vulkan, there's a chance we'll see an improvement in performance. But yes, the server side stuff where you go to a mission, the AI don't respond, or that side of things. I just think we've got to be realistic that this challenge is massive, and I don't personally mind if 4.0 comes out and it's a bit janky. If they can get it working in our hands, but it's not perfect, I would take that because it's such a big technological jump. So I'm not personally sitting here thinking, I don't ever get too uptight about things in the near future. I'm thinking, what will this game be like in 5 years? And so if a patch comes out that's a bit of a mess, that's okay. It just can't be terrible, I think. It can't be a 318 again. It needs to actually be playable.
Yeah, 323 like launch would be nice. It's got its problems, but if people can play it and get a good time out of it, that's solid. I'm like you, I'm trying to think of the more distant future, but I found that that's it's difficult to make videos regarding that. People want to know more about what's coming up right now.
Definitely.
Speaking of which, there are a few other things that they're working on doing, graphics wise. I don't know all of them, but one of the big ones is global illumination. Do you think that that can ever have performance improvements aspects to it, or is that just going to be more load on the game for people who can afford it?
I can't see a way that it'll make performance better. So we're talking ray tracing, but there is a non-ray trace version of global illumination that they're doing as well, because they realise that not everybody has ray tracing hardware in their GPUs. So there is a chance, I guess, that the non-ray trace version somehow performs better than their current lighting system. That's not impossible, I guess, but I'm guessing, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a hit to performance when global illumination comes in.
Right.
And then on the ray tracing side, the full global illumination, well, not everybody, people who've got hardware now, GPUs that support ray tracing, that hardware, as far as I can remember now, think about it, isn't doing anything unless you're doing ray tracing. So it's kind of sitting there dormant. And because the game, isn't really, really heavy on the GPU at the moment, and you've now got things like upscaling which really help reduce the load on the GPU, there's a case to say that actually there won't be that much of a performance hit when ray tracing comes in. I'm sure, like other settings we've now got in the graphics menu, there'll be options for maybe low, high, medium, that sort of thing. So I'm sure you will be able to tank performance if you really want to, and I'm sure if you've got 5090 or whatever it'll be by then with crazy hardware, you'll be able to maybe get a better performance than current generation GPUs. But I don't think we need to worry about it. I think we probably should look forward to the fact that for people who do want to run it and can run it, it will look good. Like ray tracing is and not everybody loves it, ray tracing, but I think when it's done well, it can genuinely improve the visual side of the game, which obviously it looks good already. But you would think that with Squadron coming up, they will want to crank the maximum out of the game engine and make it look as good as possible. And ray tracing just is part of that in this day and age. So I know a lot of people don't care for it, but it is part of modern gaming. And so if you've got good top end GPUs, yeah, it will help the game look even better than it does.
Yeah, I didn't think it would improve things so much, but that is interesting to hear that it might not be as big a hit as one might expect. Correct me if I'm wrong, using a system that allows for global illumination makes it easier for artists, right? Because they don't have to do baked-in lighting on a case-by-case basis. That
is my understanding of it, yeah. We don't really know exactly what... lighting is complicated. I looked a little bit into this. It is complicated, and there's still probably going to be parts where they are going to have to set up stuff themselves. So, and we're not at the point where all lighting is going to be ray traced. So if you're aware of Cyberpunk's path tracing stuff, that's really that's the end goal really for a lot of ray tracing stuff is like really heavy ray tracing. And so that's not what CRG are talking about doing at this point, but I think they've not ruled out doing that in the future. But yes, in theory, I think from what my understanding, the global illumination stuff will mean that there'll be certain parts of the lighting system that they don't have to work on directly. In theory, it should make some things easier from an art point of view, but hard to tell exactly.
That's the name of the game for them, is optimizing their workflows, which we're still waiting on some of them to show a little bit more in the development itself. But they are always doing stuff like making tools that make things faster to make. So I do hope that can help them.
Definitely.
Any other things that you wanted to talk about when it comes to performance? You think that people should know when running Star Citizen or getting started in it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, my PC isn't working very well, or whatever, or you want more performance, there's loads of videos on my channel, so just come and have a look. But the only thing that's interesting that I literally looked at this week was how aware of you are. How aware are you of frame generation? A
little bit.
So the idea basically that NVIDIA and AMD have started to use this technology to insert frames in between your normal frames. So normally you'd have a frame, a real frame, and then an inserted frame. And so that is a potential way for us to get more performance as we go into the future. So you can already run it on AMD cards at the driver level. It doesn't have to be properly into the game. NVIDIA's DLSS 3, which is their frame generation stuff, requires it to be properly integrated into the game. So we might get that with something like Squadron. But there is, which is what I tested this week, there's a program on Steam called Loss of Scaling, which allows you to do this in any scenario. But they've also just released an update that allows you to insert 2 extra frames. So you can triple your frame rate, basically. So that is a very interesting piece of technology, because it kind of fakes, because you're not really running at, say, the testing I did, I upscale, I use frame generation to go from 48 frames per second up to 144 frames per second. And so it's not really 144 frames, but it looks visually like that. So it's very smooth. There are potential issues around artifacting and things like that, but you have the input latency and lag of the original frame rate, so it doesn't feel quite like 144 frames. But for anybody who's got a half decent system that can run the game relatively smoothly, that actually works surprisingly well. So there is a way to get the game look like a real game from a smoothness point of view, to run at 144 frames per second. But it's not perfect, but it is interesting. It's quite a cheap program if people want to check it out.
So could CIG theoretically build that into their own TSR software?
That's a very good question. I think they're much more likely to integrate AMD and NVIDIA's versions of frame generation, which at the moment are only 2 times, so double your frame rate, but I wouldn't be shocked if they added a triple version at some point. I don't know. I don't really know. I think it's fairly complex, and it would require somebody at CIG to really know what they're doing if they were to do that. I don't think they could license it for the game, this losses scaling program. But yeah, I'm shocked that they did their own upscaling version. Yeah. I'm really surprised. I don't know how much work that took. I was quite shocked that they did that.
Do you know any other games that do that?
Not off the top of my head, no. I mean, the interesting thing is that it actually is better in the testing I've done than AMD's FSR. So DLSS is miles ahead, but then CIG's own version, I think, does visually look better than AMD's version. So I don't know how they've done it or what they did exactly or who did it, but it's impressive that they've done it. So maybe they could look at frame rate, but I mean, we're talking really complicated things, AI craziness. I think that NVIDIA use and everything. So I don't know if that's something CIG would want to do themselves, but I would be surprised if when Squadron comes out, if we don't have a frame generation solution for NVIDIA and AMD.
That would be cool. That sounds great. I don't know. That's kind of crazy that it can do that, but technology is getting pretty crazy by the year lately.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's not perfect, and a lot of people will think don't like it because it's like they just prefer to actually have real frames because then. Yeah, but as a kind of stopgap until Star Citizen works a bit better, it can be quite impressive.
Awesome, dude. Well, thank you for the talk. Really appreciate this one. I think this is helpful for a lot of people. I don't know how to answer performance stuff, and that's why anytime somebody comes into a stream or leaves a comment or anything, asks me about it, I point them towards your channel. So we will do that now. Can you tell everybody where they can find, because you've been benchmarking and graphically testing Star Citizen for years now, right?
Yeah. The channel is maybe sometime in 2020, so it's been a while now. Yeah. It's you can find, basically it's YouTube TenPoundFortyTwo. That's it. I'm not very social in terms of social media. I'm not on Twitter, but there is a Discord that if you're actually looking for people to help you kind of work through any questions you've got about building a PC or help with your performance, the Discord is very helpful. There's lots of people who are much more knowledgeable than me. So yes, the Discord is very helpful, but it's all just TenPoundFortyTwo, which is a long name and annoying to spell. But if you search Star Citizen performance on YouTube, a video should come up, I would have thought.
It's a long name. It's hard to fit down there in the little name thing. It's also going to be linked down below in the show notes, of course, as usual. But yeah, can confirm. Good stuff. Definitely helped me on figuring out which PC I should be using for Star Citizen. Do you ever plan on branching out, or are you kind of just covering? Are you going to be the go-to for Star Citizen performance?
From Star Citizen to different games?
Yeah.
I probably maybe unwisely made a promise that I would stick to Star Citizen, that I won't test other games. I think if I was to do it, I'd probably get another channel. But yeah, I mean, I've made a few wild promises over the years. Originally, when I've just started, I said when I get to 100,000 subscribers, I'll get a tattoo of Chris Roberts' face on my foot. So
be careful, man.
Well, exactly. That's a long way off, so we that shouldn't really happen. But
you think? Yeah. You don't know what might happen.
It would have to be a big increase in interest in the game. But I've basically said I'll stick to Star Citizen on this channel because I think if I started to do other games, I think the core of people are only about Star Citizen, and although it is complete madness from a YouTube point of view to literally make your performance stuff about one game, I mean, I love the game, so I think there's
a lot of people interested in it, man. It's clearly people are wanting to know, and maybe that's not saying great things about Star Citizen, but people are searching for performance tips, and it's good that you got the stuff out there. thank you again for joining me for this talk. It's a great one. And thank you all for watching or listening. If you're watching on YouTube, you can always check out the audio platforms. Those are ad-free, supported by our supporters. The whole show is supported by our supporters who are in the chat with us now. Hey, y'all. Thanks for joining us. And also, of course, you can subscribe to the second channel here, Space Tomato 2. Check out the main channel with videos. And make sure to check out TenPoundFortyTwo for his performance stuff. But thanks again for coming, watching, and listening. And I'll see you all next week.